Hey everybody, so I'd like everyone to give a great welcome to one of my most favorite artists and who I consider one of the most important children's book illustrators of our time and poets of our time. Not to be overly histrionic, but Calef's amazing, and we are I feel honored for Calef to be here, so the one and the only Calef Brown.
Thank you. Thanks very much. It's really nice to be here. Thanks to the illustration department and the writing and literature departments for having me. Let's see. I'm a person who always comes to things way late, like right before they're about played out. And case in point, I just started a Twitter account at the beginning of this year, not because I have anything really to communicate, anything to really share with anyone, but what I like about it is the forced limitation of trying to say something in less than 140 characters, and that's kind of one thing that's really important to my work as a writer and as a poet, to winnow things down, to edit them down, to not have an extra syllable or an extra word that's not necessary, to line by line. I have probably few dozen people that follow me out of pity or curiosity, or both. Pitiosity might be the word. But I'll read a few these deep gems of wisdom from this year that I've vomited out into the Twitter sphere. Let's see. January 1st. I'm convinced that the Tournament of Roses causes permanent neurosis. January 2nd, resolution for 2012. No shrill laughter or taco chips until after the apocalypse. January 6th, I'm still haunted by the year I spent studying entomology. I owe an aunt an apology. January 13th, I shoplift when I sleepwalk, so I often have to sweet-talk cautious cashiers and quash their fears. It's no fun being narco-kleptoleptic. January 16th. To crush a shallot without a mallet, put it in your wallet and sit down to mash it. Your paycheck will stink, but I think you can still cash it. Word to the wise, never order guacamole in Milwaukee. They make it runny there. It has a funny glare. January 18th. I have to keep my guitar under tarpaulin, since I'm allergic to guitar pollen. January 21st. I'm trying to trap a flea-bitten chimney rat with a moth-eaten oven mitt, not loving it. January 24th, I've never been to Toronto, but I want to. January 25th, I'm so impractical, I'm practically incorrigible. I just bought a dirigible, which is old and unstorageable. January 29th, I just discovered that an ordinary oboe, if played in an igloo, sounds just like a refrigerated didgeridoo. February 2nd, eating a corn dog while riding a luge. A dream has come true for a Hoosier in Bruges. February 11th. I thought it would be fun to try out my new mantra in my Nissan Sentra, but I had a fit of dementia and hit a Hyundai Elantra. February 9th. For some reason, I can sit still and meditate better on a footstool in a cable knit sweater. February 18th. I'm a hapless fool, a total boondogger, less of a Blade Runner than a spoon jogger. February 24th, I think I just saw Jean Seberg in a green T-bird. When I waved, she called me the C word. February 25th, I think I just saw Rumpelstiltskin in a wrinkled jumpsuit. March 5th, those who knew Rasputin say he appeared even more hirsute when he wore a mohair suit. March 11th, I've only been in England for a week, and I got a job driving the Beetle shuttle. My route is Liverpool to Kidney Puddle. March 12th, my favorite cartoon character is Yosemite Sam. I'm like a cyclone, he screams, or a battering ram. Let's see. March 19th, a thuggish bloke, I'm slow to learn, I chug a Coke, get soda burn. And March 22nd, my doctor is still very cross with me for singing Tosca during my colonoscopy. That's enough of that. just a, I don't know if you know this or not, but they make Illustrator Pants now. I took this picture at the local mall. I don't know if they make them for dudes too, but I want to get an Illustrator shirt actually, but if they're as tight as the Illustrator Pants, you'd have to work like this. I don't mean to brag, but I was child prodigy, art-wise. Allow me to blow your mind with some work from the 3rd grade. A school report on the first Thanksgiving, some proto-psychedelic lettering there. The subject was some of the food that they ate on the first Thanksgiving. I think I captured the essence of succotash with a few bold strokes of the ballpoint pen. Apparently they ate a lot of water on the first Thanksgiving. There's an elegant squash, a disturbingly testicular corn. I hadn't quite mastered the difference between heat lines and stink lines. I think these look more like stink lines, unfortunately, than heat lines on this pumpkin pie, and a pneumatic turkey lifting off the plate. Here's a masterwork from high school, an eyeless bum begging for change outside of a bar, a linoleum cut, and I didn't really understand that what you cut out is white, not negative, not positive. In college and art school, my work was kind of all over the place. I was not good at kind of solving problems and creating art for specific contexts, which is sort of important for being an illustrator. But what I was doing was trying to find this style. I was kind of obsessed with having a distinctive style when I got out of school, which everyone was sort of touting as the most important thing to have when you leave school. So I was sort of flailing around, trying all those different things. Seems to be a German expressionist yo-yo enthusiast there. A portrait of Ronald Reagan as the wife of William S. Burroughs, maybe. So I was, like I said, my work was kind of all over the place. I was trying to sort of creating work and trying to sort of pull meaning out of it rather than creating work for a specific context. I was really interested in both abstract work and figurative work, and had this sort of like clunky way of putting them together where I was interested in, calligraphic mark making and stuff, but also sort of realistic drawing, so I would like sort of glom them together. And I took this hot illustration mess to New York after I graduated, and one of the first things I did is I did this small portfolio of drawings of shoes in pastel. I was working in this weird sort of technique in pastel of layering it and having to fix it and stuff. It was really kind of a overly worked kind of process, but I did this small portfolio of drawings of shoes and took them around, and a couple of people, this great guy, Steve Byram, an art director at Columbia, then Sony Records, gave me one of my first jobs for this heavy metal ad for a compilation record of these heavy metal bands, Warrant, Judas Priest. I didn't become a heavy metal artist of record or anything, but it was funny that that was one of the first jobs I did for these bands that I had no interest in whatsoever. And did a couple album covers for R&B, like a rapper R&B artist. And did a few jobs for Spin Magazine in this style, where I was starting to sort of like reduce things down to very geometric kind of reductive process of trying to kind of create real elemental shapes and stuff. This was a mailer I did for Halloween. So this is some stuff from my first portfolio. And I liked some of the end results of the work, but the process itself was really, I didn't like the material. It was sort of impermanent. You had to spray fixative all over it. It was sort of toxic. And even though I liked some of the results I got and images I was making, the process itself was like very linear, doing this refining things down to these, fewer and fewer lines, and then doing a rendering of your sketch and transferring it and everything. It was very step by step, which really wasn't, my temperament really. I moved back to LA after a year in New York, and I did a few pieces in the same process. using lettering forms rather than imagery, and I got some jobs from the sort of record companies. What I was doing was collaging these individual letters that I was drawing in pastel, and that opened up a little bit. Like I found that to be a little bit more fun to be able to move things around. It wasn't so step by step and rigid of a process. And I did a bunch of stuff for the record companies. I would render each letter individually and cut them out, like they're about this big, and then color Xerox them down and then collage them. And it was this sort of weird, convoluted process. Like these letters were each like this big. I shrunk them down and pasted it up and everything. It's really. But I wasn't making a living, so during school I'd done some animation work, production work, like cell restoration in New York, some layout, a little bit of like cell inking and stuff. So I decided I'd try to hit up the animation companies for some character design. Like I thought that would be fun. Like I'll try to get some work doing character design. So I did, like out of left field, I did this little small portfolio of characters and sent them out to the animation companies, and big surprise, they weren't really interested in my vengeful Christian superheroes or alcoholic baseball players. I didn't really get any response to any of it. I did this mailer with in color of some characters, and got a response from the Klasky Csupo, who were producing The Simpsons, and they asked me to take a test to be a background and a character layout artist. And I slaved over this test that they gave me for like 2 weeks, trying to learn to draw the characters really quickly. And I was kind of arrogant about it, like, oh, I've got this, I can draw these characters, no problem. Didn't realize how sort of complex they are. And then they made me wait like a month and drew it out, and then told me, sorry, not good enough. So that was a drag. But I got my revenge a couple years later. I did this painting and then like color Xeroxed it and then crumpled it up and then flattened it out and scrawled this note on the back and sent it to them. Me draw Simpsons, good, you hire me. They probably like increased their security over the next couple weeks. This is a book that I had when I was a kid that I really loved. Not so much the story, it was a retelling of the Easter Bunny story in China, but just the illustrations. These animal characters were painting eggs, but there was this one illustration that I loved. I was starting to get interested in drawing and painting, and I loved this picture of this beautiful decorative tray full of different paint colors and brushes and stuff. And as it turned out, when I first started working in the style that I work on now, this is because of animation. I worked for a while restoring vintage animation cells. There was a boom in sort of the value of old Disney cells and everything, and a lot of them need to be restored because the paint was cracked. And so I worked for the studio, carefully removing the cracked paint and then trying to match the exact color of some of those Disney colors are amazing. So I might spend, a good part of a day trying to find the right purple or something and mixing the colors in these little film cans. So that's kind of what I generated towards as a process when I first started finding a style that I liked working in, that was cut to much more fluid, and I could correct the work. Acrylic paint is, you really can't make a mistake because you can always rework things. So these are some of the pieces I first did that I liked the process as well as the result. I actually enjoyed doing it, unlike the pastel stuff. This piece got into American illustration, and some of these first pieces that started getting me work were this piece from the New Yorker, this one from the LA Times, just working really directly. And then I started to do some portraits for Rolling Stone in this style, which was a lot of fun. It gave me a lot of sort of leeway to interpret. So one of the last ones I did was Elliott Smith. There's the band Cigaros, I think. This is a more recent one, a portrait of a drummer from the Mothers of Invention named Jimmy Carl Black for a show called Cut to the Drummer, about drummers. So the next few years I did a lot of editorial work. It's something I've done, I still do a fair amount of editorial work, and it's probably what I enjoy the most, whether it's sort of small spots or larger pieces. Magazine work has been the bulk of the way I've made my living up until I started doing children's books as well. And some of the most, these are some recent pieces for a magazine called Plan Sponsor. I don't know if Adam's talked about it, but they use some really great illustrators. And each sort of issue, you can see it online, I think, has like a lot of great work in it. And a lot of times they give you a lot of leeway to interpret things. I mean, the subjects are financial, and a lot of times I don't even understand what the illustration's about. This was a piece about the bond market or something, and the art director said, look, just make something that's really complicated, that looks like things are moving around, and that's really what the essence of the article is, that this stuff is just so complicated. So a lot of times you get to sort of like really openly interpret these kind of dry subjects. After I was working for a couple of years, I started to do these limited edition promotional pieces. And I saw some people were doing some really nice gatefold accordion pieces to promote themselves, and I really wanted to try something like that. So I did this little gatefold piece that was like I Xeroxed like a painting onto cardstock and cut them up and did an edition of 50 of this gatefold little piece, and it was called, I think it was called 9 Personal Things. And I think it went, as you read it left to right, it went my idol, my trophy, my test tubes and beakers, my roommate, my sponge cake, my Dutch wooden sneakers, my fish tank, my savior, my normal behavior. And I did send about 50 of them out, and art directors like really responded to it, and I was getting calls like, hey, do you have any more of those? Could you send me one? People held on to them. So I did another edition, I think, of 50 and sent them out. It was the first time I'd written something to go with my images as far as this style of illustration. I did another one, so another gatefold piece that I cut out and made into an accordion fold. 5 superheroes, Green Spaniel, Super Thumb, not pictured with his sidekick, the lone finger, Broken Man, he of the superhuman alimony payments and drinking problem, Captain Allergic, and the Partial Avenger. That's my favorite. Who exacts vengeance on a percentage basis. I did one more rhyming one in that same style. It was really fun to sort of write something for my own imagery. I hadn't really done that before. I was illustrating other people's stuff. And a couple of years after that, I was asked by a travel magazine to illustrate. They called me up and they said, we're asking a bunch of illustrators to illustrate their own stories for a travel piece. And it was really kind of an honor. I felt really, it was very cool to be asked to write something to go with my own, to be sort of treated like a writer. I wrote a story about when I was 21, I spent almost a year traveling in Sri Lanka and India. And it was a story about basically getting mugged by a bunch of monkeys who stole my lunch. They took a mango from me, basically surrounded me, and then I like froze, and they came up and took this mango out of my hand. So I had the mango and a monkey. That experience of sort of being treated like a writer as well as an artist was really, really cool. I've always kept sketchbooks, and at this time I was sort of thinking about trying to write something for kids. People were suggesting it to me because of my work. Oh, your work would be great you should do a children's book. But I wasn't sure about how to approach it, what kind of writing I wanted to do. And I thought back to this time during when I was in school, in college at Art Center. I was home on a break, visiting my brother, and we took a car trip from Philadelphia to Boston, and my little nephew was like 4 years old. And we were sitting in the back seat just talking and stuff. It was a long ride, and a Winnebago went by. And he's like, he said something like, Uncle Calef, is that guy driving his house? And I said, yeah, it pretty much is driving a house. And I always try to keep a sketchbook, so I did a quick sketch of a house driver, and that cracked him up. So we thought about, like, what other things could people drive? And he was giving me these suggestions, like he would say, oh, table, he could drive a table. So I'd do a quick table driver, and we'd make up a little rhyme about it as well. Surfboard, just a surfboard driver, a sailboat. And just the way he was responding to the drawings was really fun, and it was very personal to see him reacting to these drawings. And we'd make up little rhymes, like swing set driver. He suggested, don't come to a sudden stop or your friends will fly around the top. A bathtub driver, a TV driver. And when I decided to try to write a kid's book in '96, I decided to go back, to get away from everything in my life and go back to India, because I love traveling there and it was really inspiring. It's a very easy place to travel, it's inexpensive. And I went back for about 5 weeks in '96 with this intent of, I'm going to come back with something, I'm going to try to write something there. And be inspired by the place and just be able to focus on that, be away from my normal life and everything. I love collecting sort of ephemera, from taking pictures and stuff there. So I stayed for about 5 weeks, and I wasn't sure what I was going to try to write about, but I was just really inspired to be there. The reason I depict myself as a blue elephant in the back of most of the books I've done is because of the imagery of Ganesh and elephants there. So I brought a bunch of sketchbooks with me and was just doodling. And I gravitated away from trying to create a narrative that went over a whole book, and I started writing these short rhyming pieces because somehow I felt like I had an affinity for it. Some of the first poems that turned up in the book just came out of, rather than trying to develop a plot, which I didn't seem to be working for me, rhyme and short, I called them stories rather than poems because I wasn't sure if it was really poetry. But this is the first dummy that I brought back with me, was 14, what I called 14 stories, animals, and sort of different scenarios. I thought about, I think it's because I lived in LA, traffic jams all the time. Another tightrope traffic jam on Highwire 66, 50,000 acrobats rehearsing fancy tricks. So this dummy, I sent it out to a bunch, maybe 15 publishers, got rejected by all of them except Houghton Mifflin, an editor there. Really liked them, so that became this first book, Polkabats Octopus Slacks. I think this is my favorite poem from that book. And one of the things I tried to do was to, even though they're short pieces, I wanted them to each have sort of a beginning, middle, and end, to really tell a story. That's why I called them stories, that even though there may be only 10 lines or 8 lines, I wanted them to introduce character or have some action and have a beginning, middle, and end. Introducing Ed with cherries on his head. He says, I like the color, so all his stuff is red. Last week he had a fever, his head was very warm. It smelled like cherry marmalade and flies began to swarm. So you like introduce a character, something happens, something else happens that suggests future action. This one's about a jacket full of pockets and what are in the pockets. And I thought back about those drawings I did with my nephew came back into my head. And this character, the bathtub driver, became one of the poems. And the other thing I wanted to do was not to get away from like Dr. Seuss type rhyming and the kind of, there's certain like ways that children's poems would fall into, these kind of rote kinds of rhyme schemes that I wanted to get away from and sort of let the language have a variety of rhyme schemes for every poem and not just stick to any kind of. So with this one, I tried to make things rhyme, and then have like a thudding, like punchline to the end of them, so that it gives you something unexpected. So the bathtub driver is coming to town with imported shampoo that he sells by the pound. His one-legged duck rides along for good luck, yelling 3 for a buck when they're having a sale. The bathtub driver won't stay very long. His supply of shampoo will soon all be gone. So get up and sing out a fabulous song for a sweet-smelling, soap-selling, tub-dwelling guy and his one-legged duck named Alfonso. So you get the sweet-smelling, soap-selling, tub-dwelling Alfonso. Sort of defeat the expectations of that kind of rhyming. And then that character of the surfboard driver popped back into my head as well. And I thought about I don't know why I drew him in the desert, but why would a surfer be in the desert? So sort of pulling a character out of his usual environment is something I've done in a bunch of the poems. In a dry and dusty desert town, the lonely surfer hangs around. Perched upon a prickly pear, he usually wears a worried frown. People ask the surfer dude, why so far from the ocean blue? Because I'm so afraid of sharks, he says, and water too. Getting sunburned. My second book is called, the follow-up to the first one, is called It's called Dutch Sneakers and Flea Keepers. And I thought back to that promo I did, this painting of the Dutch wooden sneakers. So one of the title poems is called "My Dutch Wooden Sneakers." Dutch wooden sneakers. My Dutch wooden sneakers from Holland, the grooviest shoes on the block. I love them so much. Did I mention they're Dutch? I don't care if it hurts when I walk. My Dutch wooden sneakers from Holland, handmade out of some sort of pine. They creak and they squeak and they constantly leak, but I just can't believe that they're mine. Another one from that same promo about that weird fish tank, globular fish floating, became this poem called Mysterious Fish. Mysterious fish tank, mysterious fish, green like asparagus, flat like a dish. Toss in a peppercorn, then make a wish. Mysterious fish tank, mysterious fish. Almost all the poems in the first book came out of drawing. Inspired by drawing and then writing about the drawing or the character or stuff that came out of the sketchbooks. And I started to have a few, starting in the second book, that came out of language, and then something that would happen with language, and then want to tell a story about it. Like I have some dyslexia, and I've always transposed letters and numbers, and so I think I looked at the word rattlesnake, and I saw the word tattlesnake. The tattlesnake suggested a story and a character, so I would go from that. Like started to go to pull ideas from language rather than just from drawing. This one goes: an odd little creature that every kid fears is a snake with unusual stripes and big ears. It spies on you, tells on you, then disappears, leaving the house with your parents in tears. Now because of that snake and one small mistake, you're in trouble for 60 or 70 years. My third book, I wanted to try something different. I did want to try to have a consistent rhyme scheme throughout the book. I went back to India to write in 2000, and I stayed for about a month that time, and that was kind of a weird trip that time. I got sick a couple times, and wasn't really, I don't know, I had some illness, and didn't feel great that trip, and it was kind of strange. And ideas weren't coming to me, but what I decided to do was I kept reading guidebooks all the time about where to go and what to do, where to eat, where to stay. I decided to make it about that, about a guidebook, make up a place, and take the reader on a tour of it. And this book is really inspired by Seuss, and I wanted it to be the most detailed book I'd done, with the most characters, and have everything be really kind of my own invention, the architecture, the plants, and sort of go hog wild. It's a bigger book than my other ones. And the rhyme scheme is consistent from page to page. There's a section on the left side and a little coda, like a punchline or something on the right, which completes the rhyme, and sort of like the time it takes for the viewer to go from the left page to finish the rhyme on the right page is kind of like the timing, supplying sort of the timing. So like this is the museum, the town museum. Paintings are stacked from front to back on every single wall. Ponder the pictures of flowers and cats wander down the hall. Once you've begun, you can't look at just one. You have to enjoy them all. It helps if you're really tall. And I also have a consistent group of characters that appear on every page. My alter ego, I guess the elephant guy, appears on every spread. There's a group of about 5 or 6 characters that are the tour group that appear on every spread, and there's sort of like this hide and seek stuff that goes on so kids can notice things after the 5th and 6th reading. There's a little dog that's a different color on every page. And my son, who's 2.5 now, he started to really get into this book, and it was really rewarding to see him engage with it the way I wanted kids to find all the characters. In fact, he wanted to name them all. We would all give them each names. We'd find, the guy with a sort of stair-step hair. There's a woman with a kind of a bun hairdo, each with a visual signature about their appearance. And so we'd want to find them all and name them. And he wanted to give names to every character on this page, and he could remember them. We wouldn't read it for a week, and he'd come back and go, this is this person, this is this person. I had totally forgotten them. But it was really fun to see that, the way that I envisioned the way kids might read that book and have fun with it. There's sort of hidden stuff in these pages. And there's always stuff about food in my books. This is the spread. Speaking of snacks, it's time for lunch. What would you like to try? Macaroni yogurt on a carrot tulip pie? How about some sauerkraut with melted cottage cheese, or chewy chocolate enchiladas stuffed with frozen peas? Tip and I'd eat lots and lots of banana asparagus stew served with sweet and sour sauce. I think you'll like it too. It's certainly easy to chew. And you can also find all those foods that are mentioned in the text. So as I was doing this, working on this book, and it was 03, and sort of, it was great to be sort of pouring all the positive aspects of my personality, all like my optimism and joy and color, but I sort of didn't have an outlet for like anxiety and self-doubt and all this stuff. And I wanted to do some work that was completely different from any of this. And I discovered these Rotring pens, which are like rapidograph pens, but they never dry out, and they create this beautiful consistent line like rapidographs. And I started doing these improvised, strange drawings that were completely improvised on sort of these different kind of papers that worked really well with this pen. And I'm not sure where they came out of. I wanted to do something completely different, and these crazy characters were coming out, sort of not centering myself, starting on the left side of the page and drawing from left to right across the page. These drawings were sort of teeming with these hybrid animal-human creatures, and a lot of them were, but all improvised, no sketching or something, just as a daily drawing exercise, basically like a sketchbook. And I did hundreds of these drawings between like 03 and 06. And this was for Blab, the anthology. I wanted to do a large piece. I think this is about 14 by 28 inches. And I started from the left-hand corner and started drawing from left to right. And this sort of field of these creatures migrating from left to right. All heading in the same direction, and going back and forth between sort of shape and then personality, and giving them sort of these human characteristics and then animal characteristics, and just sort of like abstract, and going back and forth between abstraction and personality. And this was I did a large piece for the next Blab issue, where I did the drawing and added some color, and it was a spread that started out, sectioned off a large diamond shape on a huge piece of paper, and started drawing from left to right, and it starts out like that, and fill this large page. And when I was doing this, I was thinking about this book I had when I was a kid, Babar the King. And at the end of this book, which is very traumatic, in Babar the King, Babar's mother, I believe, gets killed by hunters in the beginning. It's like Bambi. It's like really traumatic. And there's all this heavy stuff in it. There's a war and everything. And at the end of the book, there's this sort of cathartic scene at the end of the book where these angelic elephant characters come and chase away all these personified, almost like Hieronymus Bosch characters for kids, representing sickness, cowardice, what else? This is the French edition, so I don't know all the words, but there was something I thought about those characters when I was drawing these. Here's some of them close up, all sort of arguing each other and molting and interacting with each other. I thought about some of that sort of strange, surreal creatures, and I just stopped doing them after. I think in like 05 or 06, I just stopped doing that kind of work. It was really killing my eyes because they were such small, detailed drawings. But I wanted to figure out how to use that experience of improvising these characters, and I got the opportunity to contribute something to this book called Our White House. And they asked me to do. They asked a bunch of artists to do to represent the 4 freedoms, and they asked me to do a spread in the book representing freedom of speech. And I knew I wanted to do something about a protest. I wanted to do a protest scene. I thought it might be a good opportunity to do. Originally, I wanted to do like a huge, colorful protest scene, people coming together and exercising their right to protest. But it was a pro bono job, and other things had to do other things first, and I only had a couple days to do it, so I decided to sort of try to take that same approach of improvising, drawing from left to right, but do something that actually communicates an idea and solves a problem. So this is what I did, and I drew this in with a mechanical pencil rather than a pen, but started from left to right and just created a scene of these creatures sort of having a march together. Some animals, some humans, some plants, sort of having a protest together. And I think that the publishers were expecting more, something like this. So they were a bit surprised when they got this piece of art, but they ended up really liking it. And I really enjoyed sort of doing something completely different from painting, of drawing with line, defining everything with line, and creating some characters that actually weren't totally, you know, obscure, but actually communicated an idea. So I've done that a few more times of sort of working spontaneously and trying to create a field of characters, basically. This was something I tried. I wanted to submit a New Yorker cover. I had sort of an idea for a New Yorker cover. So I did a first sort of drawing roughly in brush and ink of all these people on the phone, and there's one guy reading. It was a little close to a couple other New Yorker covers. It wasn't. I thought I was thinking of it for a fiction issue or something, but they didn't use it. But it was fun to sort of use this experience of doing all these improvised drawings and sort of get something out of it that I could use towards furthering, you know, work that, you know, worked as illustration and communicated stuff. My fourth book is called Flamingos on the Roof, and this book was a lot of fun because I got to sort of control all the aspects of it. I did the end papers. I designed a font to use for the text, designed it, and it was larger than my other books, 64 pages, and I got to basically control everything. This is one of my favorite poems from this book, called Soggy Circus, about a flood. The circus was flooded. It happened so suddenly. What would they do? Nobody knew. The ringmaster shouted, "It's part of the act." Some of the spectators started to boo. A clown got some laughs with his kicking and splashing. The audience followed his cue. The strong man just played with a toy that he made, a green origami canoe. That's modeled after a friend of mine, Dan, who was a wrestler. Big guy who's a perfect model for a strong man. When I talk to kids, I sometimes talk to kids in elementary school about writing, about poetry, and I try to sort of to really communicate the idea that you can write about anything in your daily life. You don't have to come up with some inspiration from above or anything. Whatever you do in your daily life, you can find ideas. There's a poem in this book, Flamingos on the Roof, that came out of going to the supermarket, and then, like I said, I have some dyslexia, and I was walking down the frozen food aisle, and I thought I saw a carton that said alphabet sherbet. I was sure I saw that. And when I looked closer, it was assorted sherbet or something, but that gave me an idea to write. The first poem in the book is called Alphabet Sherbet. By the way, if you bring a Sharpie when you go to the supermarket, you can have fun with packaging. Other sort of simple ideas. In Maine, where I live, there's always a friggin' ship in a bottle at every restaurant or whatever. So I got this idea about, what else could people put into bottles? So there's a poem about Bob the burly biker. Built a chopper in a bottle. No one ever put together such a perfect model, all inside a bottle. So exact, in fact, it has a throttle on the side. Bobby often wishes he could take it for a ride. He's so pleased with his... like I said, some of the poems come out of, rather than coming out of visual ideas, I wanted to write a poem about using the words vampire and campfire, and I worked for a long time on it because the words are related. The words camp and vamp are related, and the words pyre, funeral pyre, and fire are related. So I thought there was a story there, so I wanted to start with just those two words and try to create a story. It took me a while. It's called A Camping Tale. I picked a spot to pitch the tent and started up a campfire. Evening fell and all was well until I saw a vampire. Thinking fast, I hollered halt and grabbed a jar of garlic salt. I shook it in the campfire smoke, which quickly made the vampire choke. He stamped his feet, he shook his cloak. I tried to calm the batty bloke and offered him some food. The things he said before he fled were really rather rude. This is another one which, the idea for this poem and illustration came out of a drawing But through the drawing, I sort of found literal or verbal connections within the idea. I had just done this little drawing of a guy sitting inside a tire. So I thought, why is this guy in a tire? He became sort of like this hobo prince. Does he live in the tire? And the poem's called King of the Tire. Presenting the king of the tire. Remember to call him sire. His Majesty's crown is a tattered old hat. His calico cat is a bit of a brat. Before he retired, he lived in a flat, but that was long ago. So there was a connection, flat and as a place to live, and flat as a tire, and retiring. He retired. He retired. He didn't retire, he retired, and from a flat to a regular tire. So it's funny that sometimes you see a connection visually and you find that verbally, with language, there's a connection there too. So this stuff is kind of linked. Like I said, I tried to shy away from rote kinds of rhyme schemes, and in this book I really tried to give each poem its own rhyme scheme and try to not just have the emphasis of the rhymes on the end of the sentences, to try to rhyme multiple syllables. This one's called Orchids. Orchids are awesome, incredibly so. They steadily grow deep in the forest where the tourists and the florists never go. There's a lot of near rhyming as well, and not just rely on, because they're meant to be read aloud. I don't have to rely on exact rhymes, because when you're reading stuff aloud, it's the rhythm that carries the words. This piece has a poem within a poem, which I've tried to do a bunch of other times, but haven't been as successful. It's called Cent Haiku. I sat down to write a haiku. It seemed like the right thing to do. I wouldn't need very much time. No need to bother with making it rhyme. I reached in my pocket and pulled out a dime. This is my 10-cent haiku. Shiny silver friend, I will never let you go. Look, an ice cream truck. And I included this picture of the dog looking lovingly at his tennis ball. And when I talk to elementary school kids, I'd say, well, what haiku is the dog making up about the ball? And so sometimes they'll go back to the classrooms, and one of the things they'll do is they have the kids write a haiku. And I've gotten some of these in the mail, and this is my favorite one. Where is it? I want that great ball. Someone give me that great ball. I needs my slobber. I love that. There's usually at least one poem in each book which is a retelling of something traditional. This poem, Skeleton Flowers, is a retelling of April showers bring May flowers. Late October showers bring delicate skeleton flowers. The Gingerbread Man, my version is the Runaway Waffle. This one's called New Utensil, and it's a retelling of the old limerick kind of poem, which I eat my peas with honey. I've done so all my life. The taste is kind of funny, but it keeps them on my knife. This one goes, I eat my beans with lots of lard, the kind without the pork. But here's the rub, this tasty grub just slides right off my fork. So I found a little ladle and a handle from a hatchet. Several feet of wire were required to attach it. For eating slippery lima beans, nothing else can match it. And this poem brought out my inner entrepreneur, and I made a prototype. The patent is pending now. Then we move into the marketing and manufacturing phase, if anybody wants to get on the ground floor. I think it's going to be big. Actually, a bean-eating system rather than just a utensil. I have to come up with a catchy name. This book I loved when I was a kid. An illustrated edition of Myths and Legends, Greek Myths and Legends, illustrated by Martin and Alice Provenson, some super prolific, amazing illustrators in the 50s and 60s mainly. Really influenced by their style. Loved this book and all the stories about all the creatures and myths. I got to do an illustrated book published by the Getty Center where I got to do my own versions of these creatures, the Minotaur and Basilisk and Chimera, and one of the most fun projects I've worked on. 20 different mythical creatures, and as I was doing it, these creatures started bleeding into my sketchbooks and my own poems. And this is the poem that is in the poster. Medusa's sister Sally. Oh, for goodness sake, instead of having hair, she has a single lazy snake. If you happen to glance at Medusa by chance, you turn to solid rock. Sally's curse is even worse. She makes you stop and talk. There's the hippocamp towing Poseidon, the king of the sea. And so I had to write a poem about Poseidon, whose head was nearly bald, much to his dismay. He picked some kelp, and with some help he made his own toupee. Although it smells of oyster shells and often floats away, old Poseidon loves his hair. He wears it every day. And there's a Sphinx, which became a tiny baby Sphinx, which is sort of based on my dog, who kind of looks like this little Sphinx character. And then some of my own mythical creatures came into this book as well. The alligator caterpillar who turns into the allibutter fly. And then also into my personal work, this sort of these creatures, hybrids of different creatures, sort of populating my own paintings for myself as well. Sometimes I sort of write about them, and people as well. One of the things I miss about living in LA was that every few months, well, maybe 3 or 4 times a year, there were these vintage ephemera kind of flea markets where old antique greeting cards, old advertising cards, stuff from the Victorian era would be for sale, like old board games, sort of lots of crazy old printed interesting stuff. And so I would go bring a notebook. I'd buy a few things. They're kind of expensive, so I didn't buy tons of stuff, but I would look at, because there was just like stories in these images, and a lot of them are really, they're meant to be very whimsical, but they always have like from this era, they always have like a kind of a sinister edge to them that I loved. So I would sort of take notes and maybe do little sketches, buy a few things. I just love imagery from this era. The puppies are going to eat good tonight. I got a little gnome for dinner. Oh yeah. That monkey's going to be wearing his spats and hat and messenger bag very soon. This is an artist I love from an early, I think more like the 1860s, I think, J.J. Granville. His anthropomorphized animals are so amazing. Some of my favorite. The draftsmanship of his work is just stunning. I love his animal creatures. This is an artist from the kind of the 60s, I think, mainly, John Alcorn. Also someone who I love his graphic sense and the way that his animals and people are so beautiful. This is from a music book. This is examples of Kaligat painting, which is a style of Indian painting that's kind of like these paintings were created as almost like souvenirs at this temple in near Calcutta, the Kaligat temple. But the combination of pattern and of really fluid and spontaneous brushwork is really amazing. I love these paintings. This is another artist that I really love. I've only been able to find 2 books of her work. Her name is Francesca Temerson, and she did a book of nursery rhymes that I have, and she illustrated a Per Ubu edition. But I love the economy of her animals, creatures. Mixture of some rendering and some flat areas and pattern and everything. Really expressive. There's the end papers of the book. This is an artist from Chicago named Carl Wiersum. He does a lot of stuff that sort of humanized animals, and his graphic language is really, really cool. Part of a group of artists called, sometimes called the Harry Who, or Chicago Imagists, from the 1960s through into the 70s. I love his graphic language, and a lot of humor in his stuff, which I love. This is my 4th book, Soup for Breakfast, which just has a bunch of poems about food. This was a poem called Oilcloth Tablecloth, inspired by overhearing someone say the words oilcloth tablecloth at a flea market. It was in Maine. It was at this thick Maine accent. I heard someone say, "I'm looking for an oilcloth tablecloth." And I thought this was really musical, something, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3 about that phrase, oilcloth tablecloth. And so like started repeating it. It sounded kind of beatnik. So the poem goes, oilcloth tablecloth keeps the table dry, despite the many soda spills and coffee gone awry. If someone sloshes orange juice, or baby starts to cry, oilcloth tablecloth keeps the table dry. I can see people playing bongos and reading that. This is a poem that was inspired by a little doodle in my sketchbook. My chickadee is sick of me. He's always in a snit. I'd take him to the movies if he wasn't such a twit. But I like that phrase, a chickadee is sick of me. So I decided to try to build a poem out of that, making lists of the names of birds. And the poem goes, I told a secret to an egret, but he couldn't keep it. Now every sparrow and swallow in the whole hollow thinks I'm shallow. The whippoorwill avoids my windowsill, and I got a talking to from the cockatoo and the cuckoo too. Even the chickadee is sick of me, all because I told a secret to an egret. I regret that. It's another poem that's built out of making a list and then making connections between food and weather, inspired by the saying, cooking up a storm. You know, hear people say, oh, we cooked up a storm. So I thought about cooking up a storm. What does that mean? Like maybe you could go to a diner. The poem's called Weatherby's Diner, and I tried to list all the weather phenomena I could think of, and then and try to make connections between food and weather. So the poem goes, whenever you're looking for something to eat, Weatherby's Diner is just down the street. Start off your meal with a bottle of rain. Fog on the glass is imported from Maine. The thunder is wonderful, order it loud, with sun-dried tornado on top of a cloud. Snowflurry curry is also a treat. It's loaded with lightning and slathered in sleet. Cyclones with hailstones are great for dessert, but have only one, or your belly will hurt. Regardless of whether it's chilly or warm, at Weatherby's Diner they cook up a storm. This poem about snails is in my first book. And whenever I sign that book, I do a little drawing of a snail. And when I talk to elementary school kids, I do this little demonstration of it. You can draw a snail no matter how young they are, kindergartners or whatever. It's something that they can sort of draw, so I do like a step-by-step thing of how to draw a snail. And they really dig it. They'll see that come together and they go, wow. And even the littlest kids can sort of master all the simple shapes. And so there's a little drawing exercise. And I started spinning off these snail drawings and showing the kids, and they'd freak out and they'd say, oh, it's a dog snail and a cat snail, and they really reacted to these characters. So I started doing more drawings of these to show to kids, and in my sketchbooks with brush and ink, these snail characters. I have sort of hundreds of them, but built around moving back and forth again between pattern, between abstract qualities and sort of like literal characters. And I've gotten a bunch of really nice drawings in the mail from kids of snails. There's a gator snail, crazy elephant snail. There's a serious bat snail. This one isn't just breathing fire, it's like vomiting fire. It's like, wah. Shark snail. There's a bank robber snail, which I thought was cool. The most ill-suited creature to robbing a bank ever, right? It doesn't have nothing to carry the loot. Slow, and if he did get away, this trail of slime would lead the police to the... This is really cute drawings. It's two roommates that don't get along, I guess. So I wanted to try to sort of bringing that stuff to kids in elementary schools and seeing them react to these creatures, these hybrid creatures, the snails. I pitched the idea to Chronicle Books, and this is a drawing activity book, which I've wanted to do for a long time, that's coming out in April. And it starts off a little introduction with me as a cat, talking about what's in the book, basically. And it starts out with a little drawing exercise. It started with the snails. Decorate the shells with different patterns. And in the beginning, there's some sort of loose step-by-step stuff to draw insects or beetle characters, going back and forth between pattern and outline. And then I started to bring in a little bit of rhyming. I wanted to bring in a little bit of the poetry in as well, so maybe they'll start to play with words as well. The book opens up like this, and there's my drawing up here, and then a blank page for them to doodle or spin off these pages if they want to. Draw a bug atop a toadstool, totally old school. Here come the whirly-turts, the helicopterapins. Two up there are twins. And then some of them have little prompts that they get less. There's less step by step as the book goes on, it's more just about sort of inspiring them to draw something and made up of shapes. Locomotives are something that I've been, steam locomotives is something I've been painting and drawing for a little while. And then towards the end, there'll be single word kind of prompts, and they get a little bit more complex. Robotentoten. And then some of the pages are just blank, just drawings, without any words as well. This is a book of sketchbooks of different artists, put out by Julia Rothman, who has a great website that you may have seen called Book by Its Cover, which features a lot of like work in progress and peeks behind things, artists working on book projects and sketchbooks. And there's a fun book featuring a bunch of sketchbooks of different artists. And I've started, instead of drawing in sketchbooks, I've started working larger in my sort of daily drawing practice and drawing with brush and ink, which I love, Sumi ink, working larger and trying to sort of retrain my hand to draw differently than open up the way I've been drawing. I'm doing a lot of these griffin. So I did a griffin in this book, that the Mythical Creatures book. I've done a series of griffin characters, because like the snails, they provide opportunities to kind of abstract the elements of the creatures in different ways, the wings, the feet, their bodies, faces. Done a couple paintings of them as well. How much time do we have left? Do you think? Alexis? It's about 8 o'clock. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit to the last two projects I'm working on. This was an Exquisite Corpse book I illustrated, where one writer would write a chapter and pass it along to another writer, and then 5 illustrators, including myself, would illustrate from chapter to chapter and alternate. It's this crazy, wide-ranging story. Another Exquisite Corpse project I worked on was a visual one where an artist would do a piece and pass it along to the next person, and they'd try to make carry over some connection, either a horizon line or something in the content to the next page, and has like 8 gatefold. It's called the Exquisite Book, and has 8 different gatefold sections. This was the piece that I was supposed to respond to, and the thing that I immediately gravitated towards was being the owner of a small dog. It pissed me off that this lady looks like she's strangling this little dog. I think maybe the perspective is supposed to be maybe he's standing on his hind legs, but it looks like she's kind of... So that kind of annoyed me, so I wanted the dog to get his revenge, so... he gets his revenge. My 5th book, Halloween, is the sort of a themed, I wanted to do a Halloween book for a long time, so this is the first sort of themed book of poetry I've done. I spent a lot of time, I always spend way too much time on the end papers, sometimes more than time than some of the interior illustrations, but I love end papers. It's one of my favorite things about books. It's a poem about Lone Star witches. Of course, you have to have cats. That's a poem called Not Frankenstein. I'm not Frankenstein, but people say I'm Frankenstein-esque. I sit at a desk in my mountain lodge and do decoupage. It's an homage, you see, to the human collage. That's me. I'm completely assembled with spare parts. My head is square where my hair starts. My gruff talk, my stiff walk, even the way I sometimes go ballistic. It's all very Frankensteinistic. It's a poem about the vampire. He only works night games. His signals are creepy. When managers argue, they make him feel sleepy. He never appears in the photos we snap. A widow's peak peeks out from under his cap when he takes a nap in the dugout. His eyes bug out, and he hisses like a frightened cat at the sight of a broken bat. How weird is that? Once, while waiting on deck, I saw him staring at the back of the catcher's neck. In schools, I ask kids, does everybody know what a Oompa Loompa is? And they all say yes, yeah. And I said, does anybody know what a Chupacabra is? And like about a quarter of them will raise their hands. And it's always the kids whose parents let them watch cable TV. And there's always those like stories about the Chupacabra. And So this is called the Oompa Chupa Loompa Cabra. The Oompa Chupa Loompa Cabra roams the western plains. On moonless nights it captures goats and gobbles up their brains. It lures its prey with chocolate bars, a local man explains. Horns and hooves and candy wrappers, little else remains. So there's the shadow of the Oompa Chupa Loompa Cabra coming in. That poor goat thinks he's scored, found a chocolate bar. The last poem in the book is inspired by the Oscar Wilde story and movie, which I love the film, A Picture of Dorian Gray. And in a very Charles Adams-like way, this is a reversal of that idea. It's called the Portrait of Gory Rene. The Portrait of Gory Rene. It perfectly captured his awful decay. Portrayed at his worst in disgusting attire, for hours and hours Rene would admire his festering sores and his hideous mange, so faithfully rendered, but something was strange. The face in the painting was starting to change, from gruesome to handsome with each passing day. Ashamed and embarrassed, he hid it away. Concealed in an attic is where it will stay, the beautiful portrait of Gory Rene. This is a poem that didn't make it into the book, called The Hawthorn Berry, which is a little bit too adult. Let's all go down to East Londonderry and pay a visit to the Hawthorn Berry, the last old Gothic apothecary. It's a gathering place for weary undertakers to relax and chat over nightshade boilermakers and other odd toddies. They talk about funerals and dead bodies, the tricks of the trade, how crypts are made, and helpful hints like which tints of makeup make cheeks appear rosiest, which headstones are costliest, which coffins are coziest. Even the nosiest eavesdroppers, gawkers, and local loud talkers find the atmosphere calming. It must be all the candles and herbs for embalming down at the Hawthorn Berry, the last old Gothic apothecary. This is one other one that didn't make it into the book. It's called Harriet Beecher's Toe. Harriet Beecher's toe. On the day she was buried, it started to grow. Rapidly swelling and doubling its size, it toppled her tombstone, but here's the surprise. This toe was quite dainty when she was a girl, a delicate pinky the size of a pearl. Now it's enormous, a towering sphere. If you look over there, you can see it from here. I got to illustrate a volume of one of my heroes and the inspirations for my work, Edward Lear, recently for Chronicle. So one of my students illustrated one of his limericks, which I always assign when I teach illustration, Edward Lear's limericks. That's the old man with a beard. Edward Lear was a master illustrator of birds and wildlife, but he also basically created these volumes of, much more known for volumes of nonsense. I'm just going to go through this quickly, some of the illustrations from the book. I've loved these since I was a kid. Uncle Arlie, the cricket on his nose. There's a nice wordless spread. I wanted to have a big wordless spread in the middle of the book. This character's dancing on the Quangle Wangle's hat. The Jumblies, these little creatures, sort of human, childlike human creatures. And there's my Owl and the Pussycat. I'm sketching. And at the end, there's a nonsense alphabet. This book, Boy Wonders, is really my own kind of interpretation of Edward Lear's limericks in a way. These are short conundrums, all short poems in the form of questions about an inquisitive kid who has all these questions running around his head. Do bees get hives? Do onions cry? Is pepper apt to sneeze? Do paper plates and 2x4s remember being trees? Are phones annoyed if no one calls? Do ants when anxious climb the walls? Is water scared of waterfalls? Don't you ever wonder if clouds get jealous, stirring storms and steal each other's thunder? Do taffy pullers ever push and make a glob of sticky mush? Do sleepwalking lumberjacks hunger for slumber snacks? Stacks of flapjacks, perhaps? Would a happy toucan from the Yucatan become cantankerous up in Anchorage or the Yukon? Do you ever wonder whether schools in Narwhal have the wherewithal to play tetherball together? Does it take courage to make porridge in a village where bears forage? Is a hiccup impolite? Much less than a belch, though, right? Wouldn't you think? Hiccups don't stink. Are lazy flies on the horizon the prize that spiders keep their eyes on? And no one likes a spider bite, but don't you think the spider might? Are crabs befuddled when plans get scuttled? If mud in a puddle makes it muddled, do kiddie pools become piddled? A couple that didn't make it into the book. Do minotaurs consider matadors a nuisance like saddle sores? What's the best footwear for kicking hacky sacks? Soccer cleats or hockey socks? If a lucky termite wins the big jackpot, would all of his kinfolk come out of the woodwork? This is a book called Pirateria that's coming out in July. I wrote it back in '06, and it became about a pirate store. And as you may know, there is a pirate store. I didn't know that at the time when I wrote it, but while I'm here, I'm going to be working with 826 Valencia, and we're going to do some things together with this book. And it's about pirates, a store for pirates, and all the stuff that you can buy there. Some of it's normal pirate stuff, some of the stuff sort of less known. Avast fast mass climbers. These handy brass timers will help you set a new record, then best it. Take one to the stop and test it. Be on the lookout for specials in our weekly dispatches. This just in, a fresh batch of eye patches, 2 per package to prevent mismatches. So it has all the pirate accoutrements. People that work there. Our helpful sales staff may look like riffraff and need a quick bath, but despite being gruff, they know their stuff and all speak fluent pirate jargon. At Pirateria, we put the arg in bargain. And lastly, this is a book. I did this card for my literary agent, who does a promotional card every Halloween. And my editor saw it and suggested, to try to write something sort of around Valentine's Day, but for kids. So not really about romantic love, but about kind of familial love, friendship. So this sort of could be for kids and adults, and this is coming out the beginning of next year. It was sort of a challenge to write something that was sentimental but not, sweet but not corny, sentimental but not cloying, and try to sort of put a new take on these sort of aspects of friendship and love. This is one that I like. Forever we'll be best friends, even during the worst trends. Remember that greenish phase? Those were colorful days. Our clothes were drab olives and loud chartreuses. We nibbled on limes and concocted strange juices with lettuce and kale. We trained an iguana to get us the mail. My eardrums still hurt from the noise that we made, performing at weddings as Emerald and Jade. We should totally start a band together. Let's call it Thunderbug or Sandal Feather. Maybe Bungee Lump? No, Panda Weather. We should totally start a band together. This is called Snow Globes. Whenever you travel and off you fly, to Europe, say, or Uruguay, you always bring a snow globe home, a plastic dome from Nome, Alaska, Lincoln, Nebraska, or Toronto, Ontario, each with a snowy scenario, a tiny diorama. The one from Peru has Machu Picchu and a llama. And finally, I'm going to end with this. I've been working on a long, free-form poem that I'd like to do as a chapter book or possibly a comic or something. I have a publisher's interested, but we're trying to figure out how the art would work, whether I might even have someone else illustrate it. But I wanted to write something for older kids that's really long, that's meant to be read aloud, and would be illustrated in a completely different way than my other books. I've got about 16 chapters, I think, so far done, and I'm just going to finish up by reading the first chapter. It's called My Adventurous Life, tentatively. It's kind of like a Shaggy Dog tale, like a Charles Dickens meets Lord Buckley or something. My life began in a tree fort in Shreveport, Louisiana, a breezy cabana with one of those fantastic lawns, the kind with gnomes and plastic swans, plywood signs, and fiberglass fawns. I was a weaselly child, easily riled and wildly erratic, full of dramatic tin drum tantrums, the loudest kind. My mom and dad, who didn't seem to mind, were more inclined to write poems and be quiet, so I decided to try it. This stood me in good stead during the years ahead when my least worst ability turned out to be verse facility. On the day I turned 11, my parents disappeared. This was weird, but not unprecedented. A bus they rented was found in a sinkhole with a mink stole, a cufflink, and some other stuff, I think. I was never convinced and have since never said that they were dead. Instead, they likely fled to start a band or join the circus. I'm sure they'll resurface. Feeling lost and listless, I went to spend Christmas with my beloved grandpa on the Isthmus of Panama. I called him Old Banana Paw and Monkey McGee, so partial was he to that ubiquitous fruit. Clever, handsome, and meticulous to boot, he wore a ridiculous suit during the spring equinox with a rhinestone ring and sequin socks. The two of us had secret talks during frequent walks in the Panamanian rainforests. Like brainy tourists, we analyzed the flora and fauna. It was a sort of nirvana, a perfect ecosystem. Never saw any toucans, though. Completely missed them. Kids, as a rule, are back to school in early September. I clearly remember the sincere concern for my severe sunburn upon my somber return to Eaton Hall. I did not care for it there, not at all. I missed my cabal, my pals in the canal zone. In my dorm room alone, I was prone to melancholy. My life, once very jolly, quickly turned to woe. As you already know, the days get shorter in short order in the fourth quarter when the leaves fall and the sky curdles and all the mud puddles are full of snapping turtles. I tried to hop those hurdles and double back, but my subtle knack for going head over tea kettle caused me to pause. I let the debris settle and loudly called for the cavalry. "Assistance," I cried, my voice hoarse and gravelly. The equestrian rescuers in question never materialized, and with tears in my eyes, I had a harsh realization that my posh education had ill-prepared me. The whole situation scared me, so I cut my hair, dusted the grunge off, and began my quest for a relative to sponge off of. It was time to become a foster child. This was the roster I compiled. Cousin Fred of Passyunk, the victim of a gassy skunk. His stench forever will endure. Think ginkgo stink meets steer manure. Aunt Clarice of Ossipee, a fan of dark philosophy. She wants to die but never will, which is for her a bitter pill. Uncle Sal of Babylon, the undisputed Scrabble Don. He uses words like psalm and fjord, and when he loses, stomps the board. Uncle John of Terrytown, occupation, scary clown. He buries limbs in severed heads. I think they just discovered Fred's. Auntie Ray of Saskatoon, her weekly column, Ask a Goon, is read in posh Connecticut by those with oafish etiquette. Well, after a lengthy befriendathon, I made my choice of whom to depend upon. It was Uncle Algernon in London town. He was so fun to be around. His numerous pets were his main claim to fame, and except for the shrew, they were all pretty tame. I played this silly game with his parrot, whom I would politely offer a packet of suet. He wanted to chew it, but never could do it. Instead of the suet, I'd give him some millet. He'd ruffle his feathers and purposely spill it. Instead of the millet, I'd offer a pellet. He'd narrow his eyes and would not even smell it. "This food," said the parrot, if that's what you call it, "is very unpleasant, so open your wallet and kindly provide me with 10 pounds in cash. I'm off to the village for bangers and mash." Thanks very much. It's been a pleasure.
Can you talk a bit about how you do your color, how you go about putting your color together in your pictures? It's such a huge part of.
I think it was helpful in a way working in acrylic paint has got a lot of limitations, and there's some things I really don't like about it that much. But for me, it was I would keep layer it, sand it down, or whatever, but keep trying different combinations sometimes until something worked in a way that was sort of unexpected. And in a way, the computer, you have that ability with the computer to be able to try all these different combinations and stuff, and undo and all that. So it's funny, sometimes I think that I have tried doing comps on the computer and playing with color and doing paintings, but a lot of times it's sort of intuitive. I'm trying to come up with combinations that don't seem like they would work, sometimes they do.
But that seems like it's related to the way it works, because you come at things at different angles. Like it's either a wordplay or it's a, it's like taking two things that maybe don't really go together.
Yeah, yeah.
But it's that mixing it up.
Yeah, I don't know. I always love seeing color combinations that are really surprising. Like really acid colors with sort of like earth tones or something. Sometimes they really work, and it's really wonderful when you see some colors that shouldn't really work together, kind of provide a jolt, whatever.
With those promotional pieces, like the ones of 50 that you sent out, where was that the first time you started writing? Did that like spark?
Yeah, that's. I think that was kind of wasn't quite that clear about that. But that was the first time that yeah, it was sort of like a comic. It was first time like using humor, putting sort of absurd words together with images, and almost like little books. I still love gatefold things that unfold, either promotional things or printed samples and stuff like that, like a book. So yeah, they were like mini books.
Does it take you a while to like figure out your final poem?
Final what?
Your final, like when you have a poem written for like one of the characters.
Oh yeah.
Like how long? Like, what's your process?
It's like I said, it's trying to really keep working on something until it, like I said, it doesn't seem to be anything extra. It's hard. It's something probably short story writers do, fiction writers do. But it starts out with sort of piling on. I use like rhyming dictionaries and thesauruses, and like I said, make lists and have all these different, try to make connections between different words, and usually it's a process of writing a bunch of things and then, or versions of something, and then trying to find the right combinations, and then doing a lot of reading aloud, and not just how it sounds in your head, but actually reading aloud. And sometimes I use the cheesy Stephen Hawking voice on my computer to read the poems, and it'll be like introducing Ed with cherries on his head, and to hear someone, I'm alone, so I can't like go ask my studio mate or whatever to hey, could you read this poem, to hear it aloud, but yeah, it's kind of like, I think I had a lot of poems where I, like, after they're published, go, oh man, that would have been better like this, and still working on them. And I think I have versions of some of the poems that are better because 6 months later it occurred to me, oh, I should have done that. And so it's like they're never perfect, but it's just trying to find the right amount of syllables and the right flow, and like I said, trying to not, like, I love that last piece I read. I love that sort of stutter step rhyming, where it's not the word at the end of the syllable that necessarily rhymes. It's kind of like hip hop. The beginning of hip hop, like Run DMC, everything was rhyming at the end, and then as hip hop got more complex and more interesting, people are like rhyming stuff, like rhyming like 5 syllables, not just a single word, right in the middle of a sentence, and then stopping, and then. So like it's messing with your expectations, which is so great, and it's like part of humor too. Like the Simpsons is full of, like, the Simpsons, I think, is a sort of an encyclopedia of approaches to humor, and a lot of the stuff that they do is about setting you up to expect something, and then throwing something else in, and then sometimes even throwing something else in, like a second expectation. It's about moving ahead, not just relying on old comedic things, but setting you up. And I think that I try to have the rhymes do that in the more complex rhyme schemes, is to have you expecting something to rhyme in one place, but then throwing it in early and then stopping, and then so it's like music, like jazz or improvising. I think of it very much as, I've never been influenced by poetry really, because I didn't really study poetry, and never was into serious poetry, but the stuff is really inspired by music, by song lyrics much more so, and thinking of them as more like song-like stories meant to be read aloud, and the music of the language as you hear it, much more so than, I've never really studied poetry or fiction or anything, so much more inspired by that.
One more question. Relating what Adam said about color and what LJ said about words, your pieces are so, like, they're beautiful, they meld together so well, and then the words are so creative and crazy. Do you, like, does the color just come to you and you kind of get the feeling of the writing? Do you pull from the writing for the colors? How do you go about choosing what your scheme is going to be?
It depends on the. It depends on sort of the tone of the poem, the kind of feel of the poem. A lot of times, if it's a scene, a lot of times the scene, what's described will dictate how it's. If that one about the flood, circus getting flooded, of course it's going to be Field of Blue. I mean, unless there's a reason to make the water another color, it's going to be these figures in a field of blue. So then you go from there. What kind of colors are going to work against a field of blue? How do I want to move the eye around? A lot of the pieces are, a lot of them either have a single figure, if the poem is about like a character, a single figure in a field in a field of color, and sometimes there'll be cues in the poem about what the colors might be. Yeah, try to be faithful to the words, to try to create something that really expands on the complements and also expands on the words, so that you get more out of looking at the image than you do from the words. And then, of course, you're going to get things from the words that are not feeling like I have to put everything in the poem in the illustration as well, just to make them complementary. But a lot of times I just start with colors. Like I said, with acrylic, I can, if I don't like a section or something, I paint it over. And some of them have underneath them. There's different things where I'll try a color and then knock it out. Or,
How successful have your publicity mailers been?
I haven't done it in a long time. When I had more time to do stuff like that, I have a rep and she does mailers. But I haven't done, I guess the website, I mean, I have a blog, but I sometimes I'll neglect it for a long time. And that's, I think, for a lot of people is replaced. But I think people still like to get printed cards. But I haven't had the time to really put the effort into creating little really nice promotional things like I did when I was starting out, because you have more time when you're starting out and you want to get people's attention.
Do you start out with an underdrawing, or do you just kind of go?
Sometimes if things need to be, if the composition is complex and I don't want to, like I'll have a sketch that's fairly tight, and I don't want to wing it. I don't want to have something end up out of place within a more complex composition. I'll quickly trace down a drawing using, graphite, so that I know where generally everything is, and then as long as I know sort of generally where everything is, I'll paint it from the sketch. And other times, if it's a single figure in a field or something, I'll just do it from looking at the sketch. It depends on how complex the composition is. All right. Well, thanks, everybody.